I still remember that evening as if it were carved into my memory. The dining room smelled faintly of roasted rosemary chicken, and the warm candlelight made everything seem softer, almost forgiving. I had spent hours preparing for the dinner, not the food, but the mood. My parents had invited my brother and me to celebrate my recent promotion at work. A small gesture, they said, to keep the family connected. I wanted to believe them. I had always believed that family meant safety, love, and shared joy. I arrived wearing my favorite cream blouse and a skirt that made me feel confident but still comfortable. My brother, on the other hand, seemed to glide through the room with a smug grin plastered across his face. He always had a way of looking at me that made me small, though he pretended it was all a joke. I had learned, over the years, to laugh at his comments, to let them slide off me like water on glass. But that night, something was different. The dinner began innocuously enough. My parents asked about my work, my friends, my life. I shared my excitement about the new project I was leading, the hours I had poured into making it successful. My mother nodded politely, my father half listened, but my brother, he waited. He waited for the perfect moment, like a predator circling its prey. When the salad course arrived, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and something darker I couldn't quite place. "Hey," he said casually, tossing a folded envelope across the table to me. "Thought you might need this." I picked it up, curious. My heart thumped a little faster. Inside was a letter, printed neatly, addressed to my boss. I read the first line, and my stomach sank. My name, resign from my position at, company name. My hands trembled slightly as I looked up at him. He laughed, that sharp, cutting laugh I had learned to recognize over the years. "Just practicing," he said, leaning back. "You know, for when you fail. Thought I'd save you the embarrassment." The words landed on me like a cold wave. I tried to force a laugh, a polite smile, but it felt hollow. My mother frowned, glancing at my father, who looked uncomfortable, muttering something under his breath. I felt my cheeks burn. The warmth of the candlelight had vanished. I felt exposed, humiliated in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to tell him that my life and my work weren't a joke. But I didn't. I swallowed hard, folded the letter carefully, and placed it beside my plate. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. My brother continued with his teasing, my parents tried awkwardly to smooth over the tension, and I ate mechanically, my mind spinning. Later that night, alone in my room, I stared at the letter again. I felt a strange mix of anger and shame. How could someone who was supposed to be family, someone who shared my childhood, my secrets, my laughter, try to make me feel small at a moment of genuine pride? My heart ached, not just from the insult, but from the betrayal. The people I had trusted most had allowed it, had laughed along, had looked away. And yet, underneath it all, there was a flicker of something stronger, something quiet. I realized I had a choice, to let this break me, or to let it teach me about boundaries, about recognizing who truly sees my worth. That night, as I held the fake resignation letter in my hands, I decided, without knowing exactly how, that I would find a way to rise, not by shouting, not by revenge, but by proving, quietly, that my life and my work belonged to me alone. The candle burned down to a stub as I folded the letter one last time, tucking it into a drawer. I didn't know what the coming weeks would bring, but I felt a small, steady flame of determination ignite within me. Something had changed, irrevocably. I would never allow someone else's jealousy to dictate my confidence again. The days after that dinner felt heavier than anything I had experienced before. I went through my routine, work, emails, meetings, calls, like a machine, but inside, every interaction was shadowed by that letter and my brother's laugh. At first, I thought it would pass, that the sting of humiliation would fade like a bruise. But it didn't. It lingered, a quiet pulse of hurt that I could neither ignore nor share. I noticed myself scanning for cues everywhere. In my parents' expressions, in the subtle tones of their voices, in the way my brother's eyes darted whenever I entered a room. They avoided confrontation, brushing over the incident with casual words, It was just a joke, my father said, his eyes flicking away from mine. My mother offered an apologetic smile, but it felt distant, almost rehearsed. And my brother, he acted as if nothing had happened, yet the tension around him was like a taut string ready to snap. I spent hours replaying the moment in my mind. The fake resignation letter, the casual cruelty in his tone, the laughter that wasn't mine, it was all a mirror, reflecting the subtle ways my family undermined me, masked as humor or concern. And the more I observed, the more I realized how carefully they had painted the story of who I was, capable of failure, not to be trusted with success, somehow always less than they expected. At work, I tried to push the evening aside, but it crept into my thoughts during meetings, in the pauses when my boss glanced at me with a look I couldn't interpret. Was my recent success real in their eyes? Or would they, too, see me as someone who could be set aside at a moment's notice? The insecurity was suffocating, yet beneath it, a small voice whispered, "Watch. Learn. Wait." I began to pay attention to my brother in subtle ways. How he moved through rooms, how he spoke to my parents, how he reacted when I mentioned my work or my plans. There were moments, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when his confidence faltered, when a shadow of unease crossed his face. He didn't know I noticed. And in those moments, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and quiet validation. The people who undermined me were human, flawed, and perhaps, in their own way, vulnerable. I also discovered the power of silence. I stopped arguing, stopped defending myself. I let conversations drift, let jokes land without laughter from me. I observed, more keenly than ever, how words could wound, how pretense could hide envy, and how patience could reveal truth. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need to prove myself through confrontation. Sometimes, the quiet witness sees everything the loudest voices try to hide. At home, the air felt different. My brother's smiles became sharper, my parents' apologies more frequent but hollow. I noticed the subtle cracks forming around them, cracks that no one seemed willing to acknowledge. And yet, I remained calm. I focused on my work, my friends, my own growth. I refused to let their attempts to diminish me dictate my mood or my actions. The pain was still there, yes, but it had transformed into something steadier, a sense of clarity, of knowing I could endure, that I could rise above their small cruelties without losing myself. Weeks passed, each day a quiet test of patience and self-respect. I learned that betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers, hides behind jokes, behind smiles, behind letters folded on a plate. And in that whisper, I found a lesson I would carry forever. Emotional strength isn't loud or vengeful. It is the calm understanding that your worth is yours, that no one else can define it, and that truth has a way of revealing itself, even when you wait silently. By the end of that period, I was changed. The girl who had laughed off my brother's cruelty was gone. In her place stood someone who understood the depth of quiet observation, the power of patience, and the value of dignity. I didn't yet know how or when the world would reflect my worth back to me, but I felt certain of one thing: I was no longer small. Not in their eyes. Not in my own. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the first sign of change arrived, though I didn't know it at the time. I had been working late the night before, my mind still lingering on the subtle betrayals at the family dinner, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the company's main line. My heart skipped. I answered, masking the flutter of nerves behind a calm voice. "Good morning, this is Elaine from the board of directors," said the woman on the other end. "We're requesting an emergency session regarding your leadership on the Martin project. Could you come in this afternoon?" I paused, stunned, gripping the phone as if it were an anchor. Emergency session? About me? 1,000 scenarios raced through my mind. Was there a problem? Had something gone wrong? The voice on the other end remained professional, calm, yet the weight of the words hung heavy. I promised to be there. All day, I felt an unusual stillness. At the office, colleagues gave polite smiles, their casual comments tinged with curiosity I couldn't yet interpret. Every email I opened seemed brighter, every meeting lighter. And somewhere, quietly, I noticed the shift in myself. The fear, the self-doubt I had carried since that fateful dinner, had loosened. I realized I no longer needed validation from anyone, least of all my brother. By the time I walked into the boardroom that afternoon, I was calm. I carried a notebook, a pen, and the quiet certainty that I had earned this moment through my work, not through anyone else's approval. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and the faint, antiseptic tang of office air. The board members, all seasoned professionals, greeted me with nods, a subtle recognition of the effort and dedication they had witnessed over months. And then I saw him. My brother. He was there, not formally, but standing at the back as an observer, invited by my parents to see how I was doing. His usual confidence was gone. His shoulders were tight, his eyes darted, unable to meet mine. That smug grin that had haunted me at the dinner table was replaced by something smaller, hesitation, maybe even fear. The session began. They spoke of strategy, milestones, challenges, and results. I answered questions clearly, with calm authority, presenting reports and ideas I had spent months perfecting. Every word I spoke, every confident gesture I made, seemed to shrink the space he thought he owned in this story. He couldn't interrupt, couldn't redirect the attention, couldn't mask the truth any longer. I was competent, recognized, and in control of my own path. Halfway through, I noticed him glancing at my notebook, at the charts I had prepared, at the documents reflecting my months of effort. The color in his face had drained slightly, and I realized the gravity of the moment. He had assumed, all along, that I was fragile, that I would stumble, that I could be mocked without consequence. But the consequence wasn't loud or vengeful, it was quiet, undeniable, and entirely real. When the session concluded, the board members thanked me for my dedication and insight. I nodded, thanked them in return, and left the room with a composed smile. My brother lingered, unable to meet my eyes, as if the truth itself had silenced him. No words were exchanged. No accusations, no apologies, just the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. Walking back to my desk, I felt a strange mixture of relief and empowerment. The humiliation, the jokes, the small betrayals, they had not destroyed me. They had merely revealed the strength I had quietly nurtured through weeks of observation, patience, and self-respect. I realized something crucial: dignity isn't earned through revenge or shouting. It's earned through steadfastness, through calm mastery of one's own life, and through refusing to let others dictate your worth. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, alone with a cup of tea, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. I didn't gloat, I didn't rejoice in his discomfort. I simply allowed the quiet satisfaction of knowing my life, my work, and my self-respect were mine, and mine alone. The seed of inner strength I had planted that night at dinner had finally grown, unseen, into something unshakable. The weeks after the board meeting were surprisingly calm. Life didn't erupt into dramatic confrontations, and no one called me a hero. Instead, everything shifted in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. My brother no longer attempted the casual digs or sarcastic jokes that had once defined our interactions. My parents, too, grew more measured in their words, though I noticed the silent recognition in their eyes, the acknowledgement that I was no longer a passive participant in the family dynamic. I didn't seek apologies. I didn't demand validation. Instead, I focused on myself, my work, my friendships, my passions. I discovered the beauty in quiet confidence, the strength in knowing my worth without needing it loudly affirmed. For the first time, I felt untethered from the opinions of those who had once undermined me. My life was no longer a stage for their judgments. It was my own, entirely, and that knowledge brought an unexpected sense of liberation. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker like tiny stars, I reflected on everything that had happened. The fake resignation letter, my brother's laugh, the weeks of silent tension, they were all part of a story I hadn't yet fully understood. And now, the clarity was undeniable. Their attempts to diminish me hadn't been powerful at all. What had been powerful was my response: patience, observation, and quiet dignity. By not reacting with anger or humiliation, I had allowed truth to reveal itself naturally, and in doing so, I had claimed my own power. I thought about the family dinners ahead, the gatherings that once filled me with anxiety. Now, they felt different. I could attend without fear, without defensiveness, without needing to prove anything. My presence alone, calm and composed, was enough. And in that presence, I noticed subtle shifts. My brother's attempts at mockery faltered before they began, my parents spoke more carefully, and I sensed respect, quiet, understated, but real. It wasn't dramatic or performative, it was natural, a consequence of consistent self-respect and emotional strength. The most profound lesson, I realized, was that life doesn't always give dramatic resolutions. Sometimes, justice is quiet. Sometimes, it comes not through confrontation, but through the simple act of being steady, wise, and true to yourself. I had learned to set boundaries without declaring them, to protect my dignity without announcing it, and to let time reveal the truth in ways I couldn't have predicted. The satisfaction of this quiet victory was far richer than any public acknowledgement or verbal triumph. Months later, during a casual lunch with my parents and brother, I noticed how naturally the dynamic had shifted. My brother made a small joke, lighter than any before, and I laughed, not out of relief, but from genuine ease. There was no sting, no fear, no lingering tension. It was ordinary, calm, human. I realized then that real strength isn't about forcing recognition or proving someone wrong. It's about living with integrity, responding with wisdom, and allowing the world to acknowledge you on its own terms. That night, alone in my apartment, I wrote in my journal, I am enough. I am steady. I am free from the small judgments of others. My worth is mine, and no one can take it. I folded the page and set the pen down. The sense of inner peace that followed was profound. I didn't need anyone else's approval, and yet, without trying, I had it, the quiet acknowledgement of my capabilities, my composure, and my self-respect. The girl who had once felt small in the face of family jokes and subtle cruelty had grown into someone calm, strong, and unwavering. And though life would continue to test me, I knew I could meet every challenge with patience, clarity, and dignity. I had learned that sometimes, the sweetest victories are the ones no one notices but yourself, and the most profound justice is simply living well, unshaken, and whole.